Good evening and welcome. On behalf of the Board of Trustees of the McNay Art Museum, welcome. I am Rich Asti, the director of this remarkable organization, and I wanted to welcome you, if you didn't know it, when you crossed our campus tonight, onto the first modern art museum in all of Texas. And if you've been reading your Architectural Digest magazine recently, the June issue called out the McNay among 3 travel-worthy museums in the world created by a woman. Amazing. And I'm speaking of Mrs. McNay, who moved here in 1929, and with her husband, I think then third husband of 5, decided to build the finest house in San Antonio. And before passing away in 1950, she had an incredible vision, a vision that brought most of us here tonight. And it was for her core collection of 700 masterpieces, her 23 acres, her Spanish colonial revival mansion, to be the foundation for that first modern art museum for everyone in our state to enjoy. And we opened on that beautiful legacy 4 years later in 1954 with that great distinction. And since then, we've been led by very forward-looking people, and I'm speaking of our Board of Trustees. Some may be here tonight. If you know them, you know that they are among the most strategic people in our city. And they continue to look ahead, as our founder always did. And they looked ahead very recently in 2014. Just 4 years ago, they rewrote, the Board of Trustees, our mission statement. And they added a few very important, relevant words. If you don't know the McNay mission statement, it's to engage a diverse community in the discovery and enjoyment of the visual arts. And we lean into those words every day. And tonight, we have the great pleasure of hearing from an artist who embodies those words and who really takes to heart the word engage. And I would go even further and say connect. And if you know Dario Robleto, who I'm alluding to, you know that he's in the business of creating very meaningful, profoundly meaningful connections through his art. So it's wonderful to welcome Dario back here. If you didn't know, he's from here, a San Antonio native who decamped to Houston. We'll talk more about Houston later, and Carrie Inman, who's with us from Houston, may be responsible for that. That's another story. But Dario is having his triumphant return here to San Antonio for the first time, having a major exhibition in his native city in over 20 years. Now, if you know Dario, you know that he's an incredible connector. And his connection could not have been possible in this exhibition without those who believe in the power of his work. And I'm speaking of our lead funders for the show, in particular the Elizabeth Huth Coates Exhibition Endowment and the Arthur and Jane Steeren Fund for Exhibitions. But I also want to thank Carrie Inman from Houston, because she had the vision of, no, not stealing Dario away from us in San Antonio, but really seeing the power of his work before many of us ever did. So thank you for being the major, major lender of this exhibition here today. Now, when it comes to introducing someone who's known as a great connector, we really had to bring out our big guns to do so, and to have a conversation with someone who's so gifted, we needed to match him on stage. And I'm speaking of our very gifted head of Curatorial Affairs, René Barilleaux. And René has been with us. Yes, please join me in honoring René. He has been committed to San Antonio, taking our city to new heights for 13 years, both at the McNay and across our city's art scene as head of Curatorial Affairs. And he had great help in this exhibition by an equally gifted McNay staff member, Jackie Edwards, who's here with us tonight. And between René and Jackie, we had a lot of power at the table, and they envisioned Dario's work and Dario's show, which is on view for a few more months, Dario Robleto, Ancient Beacons Long for Notice. They imagined that show in dialogue with our recently closed summer blockbuster, Immersed, Local to Global Art Sensations. But they also had something else in mind. They were considering the fact that the McNay is very much in the business of celebrating artists from our community, and what better year to do that than a year that celebrates 300 years of San Antonio, and the fact that we are truly on a global stage thanks to the artists who make us that great. So thank you, René and Jackie, for having that vision. And enough hearing about René and Jackie and Dario. Why don't you please help me in joining me in welcoming them to the McNay.
Thanks, Rich. That was lovely. It's great to be here with you, Dario. We've known each other for quite a while, and it's really an honor to be able to share the stage with you today.
Thank you, Nick.
This exhibition has been quite a success for us, and one thing that I wanted people to know is that our commitment extends beyond the exhibition. We recently acquired a work of yours for our collection, so it's the first work of yours to enter the collection. So since I let you control the remote, I'm going to ask you to flip to the first slide. And we're just going to use this as a backdrop to talk about, I just want to talk a little more about your biography. Okay. Rich mentioned you're from San Antonio, but there are people here in the audience who don't know your whole history and sort of how you got to be here, sitting here tonight. Yeah. So I'd just like to talk a little about that.
Okay. Thank you, Rich. Thanks should be given back, of course, to your leadership at this museums. Thank you so much. And I just have to, I'm going to get to, I promise, any show, artist gets all the attention, but of course an artist can't do it by themselves. There's so many people in the background helping envision it. And truly, Carrie Inman is just like one of the shining examples of the human race, in my opinion. And I thank you for, and so thank you for that. And also my best friends in the audience, Leanne Lester, where I had my first show, she's here in the audience, which I thank her for that. That's the 20-year gap that you mentioned. And then of course all the incredible staff at the McNay who helped envision it, install it, and have been caring for it ever since, because I'm not around, and as an artist I've learned over the years that others are actually doing the hard work of communicating it to the public, and artists should nod their hats to them, of course, and so I thank you for doing that.
Thank you.
And so biography, yes, I would, let's see,
well, you were born here.
I was born here, yeah. It's like, where do I
we'll start there. Okay. You went to school
I went
here.
to Almas Elementary, what was once known as Robert E. Lee High School. I graduated from there. And had, I live in Houston, and I've been there long enough to be a Houstonian, but certainly my heart is the San Antonian, and I'm very much a product of our incredible community. I've always been a curious, passionate person that has much credit to my mother and my grandmother who supported that and encouraged it. And in this piece, when I get to it, I'm going to make my mom embarrassed by talking about
your mom's here
piece
tonight, right?
Yeah, in a second. But there was no early sign that I'd be an artist. Mm-hmm. I was certainly a passionate, curious person, which are my strengths as an artist. Mm-hmm. But I played football. I was the captain of my football team, which everybody knows in Texas, it's a big deal.
Right.
And although I was, our team wasn't that good, but
this is at Lee.
Nonetheless, at Lee, at Robert E. Lee, and I'm really proud of those years. I often say that it's not always cool in the art world to say you were once the captain of a football team.
Right. Well, I think very few people were.
Okay. But honestly, some of the work ethic, the working through pain, this drive to finish what I start, it was really molded in this very particular South Texas football culture. Although I in no way was I a typical jock. I don't want to sort of give that impression. I proudly wore my Smith's T-shirt on game days, and which caused my coaches a lot of anger to not be more rah-rah in the pep rally. But it really molded me in an important way that still shows in my work. And my mother and grandmother were my mother continues to be important to me, and my grandmother was. I did not know my father very well. I didn't grow up around him.
You're an only child.
I have a half sister, 11-year difference,
Right.
But I feel I've said before that all the things a young man goes through without a father, all those things are true. And as I've aged, I realize something though, which is my mother and grandmother were so strong that I really have not dealt with a lot of that lingering pain, because the model of feminine strength that they embody has been something I've tried to live up to. And it's made me wonder what the fuss about masculinity is all about, because
Right.
it's just such powerful influences in my life. And I love them, and I thank them. I don't know how much more you want me to go into biography, but
This is
do you
good.
mind? Okay. I went on to school. I went to UTSA. I went to University of Texas in El Paso. I originally began as a biology major, and literally had an epiphany. 100%, 24-hour shift in life, massive brain shift, chemically, I'm sure, too, and had a vision that I wanted to be an artist.
Did you ever make art like in high school or elementary school or?
No, although I say it in one way, but it's not true in another, which is, as I've grown as an artist, the things that I count as artistic, I certainly had that. For example, being a fan. I take being a fan very serious, as its own.
A fan of?
Just being a fan, like it's a state of being to me.
Okay.
I have a whole philosophy about fandom.
Okay.
As an act of long-term commitment. And it's its own source of creativity that, perpetuates itself for every generation of teenagers. It never went away with me. And it certainly displayed a type of fandom that I now can identify as truly a creative act.
Right.
So there were things like that were clearly artistic to me that I would put under that umbrella.
But you didn't necessarily recognize that at the time.
Not at all.
It was
No.
just there in you.
No. So to become an artist was very dramatic. My mother and grandmother, I know, did not understand it. I didn't really either. It was that.
Was this during college?
Yeah, it was in college, and I actually, after I had that epiphany, I came back to San Antonio for a while and ended up graduating from UTSA, undergrad. But it was that stark of a shift in life, and I have not looked back one day since. Like, it was that clear.
So when that happened, did you change your major? Did you just completely?
I did.
Interesting.
And I knew so little about the arts at that time that I thought to be an artist meant to be a painter, which it can mean that. But I immediately thought, okay, well, I got to be a painter. And so I technically graduated with a painting degree, and I've never made a painting since. And
Did you make paintings to get the degree?
I did, but towards the end, I was clearly moving on. And that's not a disparaging remark to painting, but I can elaborate on that in a minute. But I needed to do that so that I knew that I was not a painter.
Right.
So it was no way was it a lost time. And yeah, I haven't looked back since. I decided not to go to grad school. It didn't make sense to me at the time, and I haven't looked back one day. And here I am sitting with you.
Yeah, that's lovely. So, as Rich mentioned, and you alluded, this is the first time you've had a show in San Antonio, your hometown, in over 20 years. So,
Yeah.
what has that felt like? What has the response been?
It has been so surprisingly rewarding, and in the sense that I didn't really know all those feelings were there until the show was up. In the sense that oh yeah, I'm proudly San Antonian, and I'd like to come back and show what I've been doing all these years. So it's been very enriching to me and meaningful, and I'm thrilled to have the opportunity to do it.
I just found out yesterday that we've had over 23,000 people through the show.
Wow.
So you've touched 23,000 people with your work
Oh,
in just this short period of time, which is pretty
That's
phenomenal.
so strange. Yeah, artists don't generally think of that as a solid number that you can be told. It's so interesting.
Only when it's the price, right?
Yeah, I guess that's all. But that's fantastic, and
Yeah.
I'm so happy there are people I haven't seen in years here tonight that are here because they've heard about the show. So that's been really rewarding as well.
So I know you want to talk about your work.
Yes.
So what are we looking at?
Well, I thought I'd just show two quick early works. They were done here in San Antonio, and they were very important turning point works for me. I was, as I mentioned, passionate fan with music, especially at this time in my life. DJ culture, DJing were and remain powerful models to me, not only at a technical level, but conceptually, especially with the idea of sampling. Mm-hmm. And this was such a backbone of my early thinking.
Do you DJ?
I dabbled early on, but the breakthrough with these works for me was, is there another strategy to DJing? Do you have to only encounter music as an audible experience? Mm-hmm. So my early idea was, could I take the skill set of the DJ, mixing, scratching, sequencing, all those sorts of things. And one day I had this very literal idea, which was, what if I literally melt two records in a pot and mix them together and make mixing this way? Or what if I keep scratching a record until it turns to dust? So that my sensibility with materials was already coming out. And so I wanted to take the skills of a DJ and apply them over to the sculptural world. So I came up with all these projects, and I wanted to show this one. It was a very important piece to me. It has a bit of biography in it as well. And because my mother, who I mentioned, great influence on me, but two things in her life that have deeply colored my art practice. One is she used to help manage a bar, Honky Tonk, here in town. And then she went on to work at and eventually direct a hospice here in town. So somewhere between a honky tonk and a hospice, a very particular kind of Texas thing too, I was merging as a little boy, a curious little boy. And some of the most profound memories I have, which maybe weren't obvious at the time, but the times I would go with her to the bar, as a little boy, 6, 7-year-old, seeing what's going on in a honky tonk can be very traumatic to your developing brain. But what I'm so thankful for about it is that I really credit this moment as understanding something really fundamental about art. And it's this: my relationship to the jukebox in the honky tonk, in the sense that every song that was played, I somehow saw it actually happening in the room. And the relationship of the art, not as a metaphor of life, but literally life. It was happening right there.
And you could see it.
Yeah, I could see. I was observing it, and I'd hear the lyrics, and I'm like, oh yeah, that's happening right there. And so years later, I wanted to make a piece to honor those feelings and those memories. So what you're looking at, these are a little box of matches that I've carved, and on the head of each match is a very thin coat of melted vinyl records. And these are specifically the songs I remember from that jukebox. And I'm very specific. If I just want the chorus, for example, to Crazy by Patsy Cline, I'll just isolate those grooves out, grind them into powder, and then I come up with this. I'm skipping over all the research and development of this.
Right.
It's very difficult, but each match has a different song, a incredibly tragic, sad country song on the head of each match. I was also, on one end I'm pushing material investigation. But at this time, and still, as Rich said about connection, this was an early attempt to find a way for the art to integrate back into the world on the terms of the object, meaning, what do matches do? They light a fire, they have a function in the world.
Mm-hmm.
So I did a series of works where I wanted them to still retain what they could do in the everyday, but could they be more? Could you make it incredible again? And so I made 6 of these boxes. Three of them.
They're the size of a matchbox,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. And one of the side effects of the match, which I didn't know, was when you strike it, it produces this unusual amount of smoke as the flame burns through that vinyl. So almost like a trick match, hovering this puff of.
So they're strikeable. I mean,
Yes, and the point was that they function. So I took them back to a few bars, I set them on the counter, and let them do their thing. And so the way I love to tell the story is, if you can picture in your head a typical encounter at a bar. Hey, baby, can I light your cigarette? Strikes the match, and unbeknownst to both of them, for a moment, hovering in the air between them, are the lyrics likely predicting the outcome of that relationship. And
beautiful.
And the idea was, what if you had to deal with Patsy Cline in your lungs?
Right.
Or your bones? Like, what if you could ingest her, and what the song was about? So it was to me, this is a type of DJing, like thinking of other ways the music could be integrated into the room. So that was a very important piece, technically, but also conceptually.
Did you teach yourself all those techniques?
I did, yes. And that remains an important part of my practice. Is part of the joy of being an artist to me is I don't know what I'm doing half the time, and I like to figure it out. I love figuring it out. Yeah.
And do you work by yourself?
Yes, I mean, it's expanded over the years in that I have carpenters who help, or,
right.
But the object itself is always me. It's very important to me that I make the things that I show. And so to Carrie's annoyance, I have not had an assistant in 20 years. But I also, for most artists, it's not an issue to be a source of tension. But in my work, it is for myself, in the sense that this is very emotional. And some of the other materials I've used, like excavated bullet lead or hair from the Civil War, I have this motto in my studio, which is, what do I need to do to earn the respect of this material? And only when I answer that will I move forward. And part of earning the respect means it's a very personal process, and I've got to earn it. And it may take a year or 2 years, but I'm going to get there. And to ask someone else to do that makes no sense to me. It makes no conceptual or, more importantly, emotional sense, because if they have nothing invested in it. So it's so much part of how I make things that everything I put on display, I've earned it by struggling with it in some way. I hope I've earned it. But, yeah.
Let's look at the next image.
Yeah, so one more little early work. Also building off this idea of merging DJ culture into sculpture and objects that still fulfill their function in the world. So my grandmother was an avid thrift store goer, and I grew up around in them, and estate sales and yard sales. And anyway, this piece is also a nod to her. But each of these buttons are made from melted vinyl records. These are specifically Billie Holiday records, also specific to a song or a chorus or part of the song. And what I've done is I've found discarded clothing lying all over the city. Could be in a thrift store, could be in a trash can, could be on the side of the highway. And I'd bring it back to my studio, and I would mend it based on an existing button. I'd make a whole new set of buttons just from Billie Holiday records. And then I would take the article of clothing back where I found it and perfectly place it as it had been. And then just let it continue on with its life, whatever that was going to be. Hopefully, some still exists and it's holding somebody's pants up right now, a button. But it was another test of material exploration and how much meaning could I fit into the tiniest of gesture and space. Like, could just buttoning your shirt be loaded with the weight of Billie Holiday? It was one of the questions I was asking with the piece.
Right.
Yeah.
And was it hard to put those out in the world and not see them again?
It was a lesson. It remains an aspect of my work. And I really credit this to the years of hospice, in the sense that all artists experience this, which is you have to let go. You have to put it in the world, and it's on its way.
Right.
And watching hospice patients and family members have to grapple with that in a much different way.
Right.
Again, as a little boy watching that, it did something to me, and that there's a lesson in letting go. And much of my art, I hope, embodies that I'm going to do everything I can to make it meaningful right now, and then I'm going to let it go. And hopefully it will have meaning, but maybe it won't. And the best definition I've ever come up with for art, for me, is that it's a hope with no guarantee. And that's like a little motto for how I make things. And the hope matters, even if you don't get what you want.
Right.
It's the trying and the doing that mattered.
Right.
So this was a lesson to me about that. Yeah, but it hurts. Yeah, it hurts.
So-
to let it go.
Let's go back to the next slide. Or the image of the, I'm sorry.
Sorry, that one. Previous?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
And one thing about your work that people sort of recognize is the kind of description or the credit liner. When typically would say photograph or oil on canvas, and you have these sort of lengthy descriptions. So let's just talk a little about that,
yes.
because
Thank
it's
you.
always something that comes up in conversations.
Thank you. That's also directly rooted in my fandom, especially with vinyl records. One of my favorite artistic experiences still to this day is to get a new record, pull out the liner notes, read the lyrics, who produced it, where was it produced. A completely dead art form now, of course, with the digital age. But to me, that was my first engagement with literature and poetry, to read the lyrics on the page before I'd even heard the music and engaging with the language at that level. So I always thought, why can't one get home with their new sculpture and get to sing along with it right away with its accompanying liner notes? So it's from that tradition. It's best to look at them in that way. But they also do the work of description as well, as far as the act of what I did, the process. But I also do something maybe a little backwards for most object makers, which is I can't make an object until I've figured out the title and the language. So I don't.
So all of that description has to come first?
Yes, or some prototype of it. It will revise as it goes, but I can't make an object until I have the language sorted out. And title, medium, material list, or action, all of that stuff is, and I need to have it there before I can go do what I want to do. So it's a little bit backwards, I think, for most object makers.
Probably for most all of them.
Yeah, maybe. But to me, the relationship between language and material is so almost synesthesia-like in me. I need to feel by saying, like Icelandic lava,
Right.
Like this is a beautiful thing to say, and it's also a real thing. It's a material that's this merger of heat and cold. But I often find my materials by playful language practices. And often I don't know if I can find the material, or more problematically, if it exists. But it doesn't matter at that point. It just matters, does it work on the page? And then I go figure out the material part.
Let's go on and talk about the golden record.
Okay.
'Cause I know that's very critical to a lot of things we have in the exhibition.
Yes. This is my favorite record. And I'll be very brief, but if you don't know the story, bear with me just for a second. It's a really beautiful story. But in the late 70s, NASA launched 2 probes called Voyager 1 and 2. completely changed our relationship to our solar system. If you've seen an image of an outer planet, it's likely was first taken by Voyager. Incredible feat of engineering. It was designed so that at a rare 175-year alignment of planets, NASA realized if they could get in the window, they could get one probe to slingshot and push on to the next. So they could get one probe to visit all the outer planets. Miraculously, they did it. But what's more beautiful to me, which is not as widely known, is what's on board. They asked Carl Sagan, NASA knowing that this probe was going to eventually exit the solar system, which is an incredibly rare event. There are only four, as of today, 4 human-made objects that will obtain this distinction, because everything just gets caught back up in the sun's gravitational pull. But they were actually going to get out a true message in a bottle of what we once were. And so they asked Carl to put a team together, and he very, very famously came up with the idea of literally a record made of gold. I love the idea that our sign of high technology, if it's ever found, is a record,
Right.
which we've long moved on from. But it's so beautiful to me for that. Anyway, what made it on board and why are just beautiful stories. I've spent almost my whole life digging into it. I can tell you the most beautiful stories about why. And why I also argue that the Golden Record's the greatest work of art that art history's never really accounted for. And to me, it's as interesting to understand as art as it is as a scientific mission. Anyway, there's all kinds of things on board. Like I said, they all have beautiful stories. But the one I'd love to turn your attention to, which has been so important to me as an artist and as a human being, is not widely as known story of a young woman, Andrian, who was asked to be on the team, a young writer. And she was tasked with making an audio portrait of the planet, like crickets and howling wolves and all these other things, just in case something ever finds it floating in the darkness of space, there'd be an audible example of the rich audio history of our planet. But while she's working on the record, she falls in love with Carl. He falls in love with her. And they very, very famously, they admit they love each other and get engaged in the same phone conversation. And basically, they have to keep it a secret because they're still working on this. And just to heighten the drama a little here, they're working on possibly the final document of our planet. Everything they put on board has to be thought so deeply, like what's worth saying and remembering for 1 billion years.
How long did it take them to put that together?
So it's so interesting that they're working on a possible 1 billion-year mission, but they were pressed for time by NASA to get the tapes in because they needed to get it on board. It came very late in the development of the probe, and they did an incredible job. But what Anne did, to me, I also argue Anne is one of our great subversive artists that art has never really accounted for. So Anne, after falling in love with Carl, the team had not really yet discussed how to represent human emotion as a thing that once existed in the universe and that it should be on board. So Anne asked Carl, did he think some future technology may have the capabilities of deciphering the electrical signature of her heart and her brain and turn it back into whatever she was thinking about? And as I say, it's stated another way. Anne was saying, can aliens read my mind? Is basically what she's saying. And nobody could say that at the time. But this is why what she did is so subversive and why she's really my favorite artist ever. She asked Carl this, and Carl very beautifully told her, he said, 1 billion years is a long time, so why don't we try? And she made an appointment at Bellevue Hospital, was hooked up, sat alone in a dark room for 1 hour, hooked up to an EKG and an EEG, and thought. And Anne's brain waves and heart waves potentially, not only is that the final document potentially of our planet, Anne may be the final human thought to wander for 1 billion years in the darkness of space. And what she thought about has never been fully discussed publicly, which is part of what I'm trying to get to the bottom of. But the thing she did reveal, which the only thing I'll talk about right now, is after Carl died, she did finally reveal that at the end of that hour, she allowed herself a few minutes to specifically reflect on falling in love with him and what she hoped their life ahead would look like. So Anne literally snuck love on board, and in a manner that could not be discussed in the way I just told you. The official designation on the record, it simply says life signs. And technically that makes sense. They are physiological signals and it's science, so NASA had no problem with that. But actually, it's a 27-year-old woman
In love.
3 days removed from secretly falling in love and getting engaged to Carl Sagan that's embedded in those waveforms. And her big question is, which I've taken very seriously and so much of my work is about, is are we literally in there? If you take her at her word, she's saying that she's in there. The individuality of each of us is somehow accounted for in this medium, and that individuality can be pulled back out at a later date. She sent that at a time when that was absurd. I mean, even today we would have trouble accepting that. But things are rapidly changing in this field. And so a lot of my work has been about these two questions, which I've formed deeply engaging with her question. What does one gift to the only woman whose heart and mind have left the solar system? And does love survive the death of cells? And these are two of the sort of anchors to my whole practice, is trying to answer these questions.
And when did these questions sort of surface in your practice?
Before I could articulate it, I mean, I discovered the golden record when I was 7.
Oh, okay.
So it's been a long time,
Right.
but to verbalize more specifically what I'm after as an artist has been in the past decade.
Okay.
And I'm always refining these things, but my goal is, and these questions I'm taking very literal, I really want to give Anne a present one day and say, here, thank you for what you did, and here's a humble artistic gesture as thanks back. And I have a proposal of what my answer is, which I can tell you later in the talk.
Okay.
But anyway, these questions are just so important to my life and my practice. You wanna
probably go forward.
Okay. Okay. Oh, well, so now we can turn to a piece in the show.
Right.
And I just wanted to show you three projects that are all outgrowths of those two questions as the gift unfolds in various ways. I put this image up because it's if everyone's seen the show or hasn't, there are references to this kind of imagery, Hubble imagery in the show. And I'm so fascinated with this picture because as of today, that is the oldest starlight we've ever imaged. As of today, the assumed total age of the universe is 13.8 billion years old. Through this incredible thing, this brain we've somehow created devices that can image literally back to almost to the birth of the universe. This is of course by Hubble, one of the most profound artistic experiences of my life has been grappling with Hubble for over 25 years. The James Webb Telescope, which will get launched in a few years, will likely finally get us the rest of the way. And so it's not improbable to say that in the next 5 to 10 years, we will image the first star to ever flicker on in the universe. That light is still on its way here. But the deeper point about that to me is the relationship to matter and time. So photons, the reason we can see that light is because it's existed that long. It's been on its way for all these billions of years. And so, but I wanted to do a project. In that sense, the light is always alive, even though the host stars are long, long gone. So I wanted to take and reverse the perspective. And I did a series of works. This one, Survival Does Not Lie in the Heavens. This is also related to my fandom of album cover design and being mesmerized with live albums in particular. And if everybody can kind of picture in their head, it's usually the singer singing, sweating on stage, and there's usually a spotlight over their shoulder. And I remember being so mesmerized with the spotlights, because they look so much like early NASA astronomical photography. And it was just a little thought as a little boy in the back of my head. I didn't know one day I'd really explore it. But what you're looking at, okay.
Like they can fix this.
No, okay. I don't know what I pushed. No, thank you.
Yes, okay.
So I've taken, the idea is, what if something's looking back to us rather than we're looking out as light coming to us? And in that sense, all the light we've ever emitted from our planet is also on its way somewhere. And if something's looking through a telescope, that light's going to get there one day. And I'm being a bit poetic, although it's grounded in science, in the sense that although these photons won't do that, but light that hits our bodies is diffracted. Some of those photons are going to find their way back out into the universe. And my poetic take on that is, do they retain something about the moment of deflection? In a sense, are they portraits of our bodies in the way the photons hit at different points? And is there a kind of body-shaped image of photons moving out into space? And so I wanted to use the album covers that illuminated these singers. These are all now deceased musicians. But every one of these points of light you're looking at is a stage light that's been plucked off of a live album cover. Hundreds of different musicians, all who have deceased, as I said, but I'm arguing that are they still on their way somewhere? Like the light from Jimi Hendrix concert in 1970 is still on its way somewhere.
Right.
And I put up this example to show you part of the process, but a very famous image of Johnny Cash singing, and I love this image, he's singing to prisoners about being free. And the light takes on another meaning for me in this way. But this kind of just shows you technically how I take the original cover, and Herrenhound Press, I hope they're here, but they are instrumental.
Yes.
Yes, thank you so much. They're instrumental in both these projects. And so the idea so the technical part is plucking the singer out and rebuilding, if we needed to, the light behind him. That just kind of reveals a bit of the process. But in every one of these cases, it's another example.
So how many album covers does this represent?
Hundreds. Hundreds of albums.
Are any of those images used more than once?
Probably, yeah. Very tiny pinpricks, yeah. But I just know these lights so well that I know every artist that I'm looking at.
And you can identify still?
Yeah, I just was around them for so long. So theoretically, poetically, that light is on its way somewhere, and in that sense, Johnny Cash is still alive. So I wanted to apply it to us as the memory of ourselves, just like the golden records carrying this memory of the planet. Also the light beams that bounce off our bodies are, in a sense. So that's developed from ideas around golden record. Yeah, I was going to transition here. I don't know.
Good, perfect.
Yeah, okay.
This is great, yeah.
Yeah, keep going, okay. So I have this long, deep fascination with the history of recording our hearts. And that is part of my gift to Anne. The proposition a humble, tentative answer to what does one gift to the only woman whose heart has left the solar system is, for me, can I give her the entire history of our quest to record our hearts? Meaning, where's the first heart ever that got recorded? Not something we often think about, but somebody had to go first. And we take it for granted today that we understand this language of the pulse wave. But as I've since learned in my research, and many years of digging into this, because I literally was on the quest to find the first heart ever in history, the first time a human saw an image of their living heart beating over time as an image. And these are a handful of them. And I point these out because these are two of the most important. Two images that we take for granted, and in the history of image making, don't often, well, I've never heard anyone talk about them in the history of image making as milestones of image making. And in that very small category of potentially universally understood images, which is very hard to do. On this day in 1853 and 1870, we added to that list. And if you showed these images to almost anybody without prompting, we know that's life and that's death. And even in the history of imaging death, this image was confounding to the scientists at the time. Nobody had ever imaged death as a simple straight line. So this is part of developing this project for Anne, which is, can I find every heart that preceded hers that I argue had to have been recorded for her to do what she did? She did what any of us would do today. If we go to the doctor and have a heart test or a heart monitor, nobody's reflecting on the miraculousness of that moment. That we can image our living hearts over time. And what a problem that was for science for millennia until this day. And that story should be told. Plus, it's just beautiful to know the long lineage of humans and the meaning we place in our hearts. What did it mean? And which had for millennia been the domain of art and religion. As I like to say, there aren't centuries of poetry written about the lungs or the kidneys. It's about the heart. And there's a reason. Because in the long history of where we think we are in our bodies, it's been the heart, not the brain. The brain is a more recent development. So I'm building this project for Anne about literally, can I link one waveform through time and keep putting the next one next to the previous, all the way to hers in 1977. And she was relying on that technology of recording her heart, which we take for granted.
At the time.
Yeah, which we take for granted. Anne was relying that we could even do it because she wanted to preserve the longest potential knowledge of what we knew in our hearts. And she's relying on that technology and the creation of this imagery. So I really want to understand that. Here's some other, I don't know if you'd like me to continue. I'm sorry.
Please. No.
Okay. So I'll segue into the print project, which is what my mind is most on right now. And to do that, just a quick thing
This is the part of your research to get there.
Yes, and so maybe it's obvious, but research is a huge part of my life and my practice as an artist. I would even go as far as saying that I'm only as good an artist as I am a researcher. And research along lines of thought that I argue only an artist would. And so I'm always advocating for why arts should be involved in everything. I don't care what the topic is, that we should be there. Anyway, what I wanted to preface before I show you the prints is that it was very clear early on what drove these scientists. Not only could you, without cutting into someone, which would kill them, could you image the movements of their hearts outside their bodies through another medium. And because I'm so sensitive to materials, I have to tell you the beauty of this materially is what they landed on was using a single human hair as a stylus head. And they had rigged it so that when the heart beat, it would make, through a little tube of compressed air, it'd make a little hair bounce in unison with the person's heart. And then the medium to hold the image, the scientists stumbled upon holding a piece of paper over a candle flame, gathering the soot, which made a perfectly friction-free surface that he could then etch his beating heart into.
With the hair?
Yeah. So the first time in history a human saw their own heart beating over time was recorded by a single human hair in soot from a candle flame from 1853. It's just the outer edge of sensitivity and fragility. It's just so beautiful to me to unlock the mysteries of the heart with hair and soot. It's so beautiful. Anyway, but what drove them was very clear, which was they wanted to know, did disease look different as a waveform? And at the time, nobody had figured that out. Nobody knew, did disease look different? Not only were they right, they invented cardiology in this moment. And here are some of the, and I've looked through thousands of the earliest documents at this point, looking at soot from the mid-19th century, hoping it has not been smudged over all this time. And it's a beautiful story of this, what I call an atlas of disease of the heart. But what I wanted to do as an artist, and related to Anne, was to make another argument that unbeknownst to all of these scientists, I argue they were also documenting a parallel story. And what I love about it is there's no organization, it's driven by something else, which is nobody had ever seen the heart under any condition. So it's a rare case where one device made everything interesting again. Nobody had seen the heart in disease, but also nobody had seen the heart while you're drinking a glass of cold water, or going for a long walk, or having some chocolate. And so what I'm arguing in this project, and what I've set my goal was, could I find all these outlier recordings that didn't seem to have anything to do with the main study of disease, but instead were telling just the story of life, literally the most banal moments of a heart just living its life. And my goal was, could I find from birth to death, and I came up with these 50 prints.
Where are you finding these images? Where do you find these images?
Archives, libraries, all over the world. And often I probably the first one to look at them in ages, because there's not really reason to, because for a modern doctor these are irrelevant. But the project is a whole life. Can you make a whole life in a box? And one waveform moving through time. I'll talk about how they were made, but I just want to show you some of the images. So, for example, the first time in history a heart was recorded while somebody had a whistle blown in their ear. Or the first time in history a heart was recorded while somebody was smelling lavender. And so my argument, or having a draught of hot milk, or an ear lightly touched with a feather while they're sleeping, or an experiment with cannabis, sudden freedom from any unusual feeling, beginning to feel an indefinable sensation of comfort. This is the doctor's writing. Or very beautifully, the first time a mother was recorded while she's giving birth, and the twins are being recorded at the same time. It's such a brand new, we've lost perspective on how to understand these images, but I hope I'm reframing you to think about how radical these images were at the time. Because part of my argument too is that the reason the doctors or the physiologists didn't know what to do with them in a sense, because they weren't, excuse me, because they weren't directly about disease.
Right.
This is a time when the heart is still tightly wound in conflicting arguments with religion about, is the heart literally the conduit of the soul? Not metaphorically, but literally the vehicle between an immaterial world and a material one. So for a scientist to record a beating heart, you can't underestimate the potential radicalness here, because are they suggesting they're recording the soul as well?
Right.
And the reason people largely avoided studying the heart beyond the technological part was because the heart was considered a divinely ordered organ, meaning it was perfect and it could never malfunction because it was the vehicle for one's soul. So how dare science suggest it could go wrong, it could malfunction, and have disease. It was a really radical idea at the time. So I think they didn't ever highlight these recordings because they're also contending with, but what are they suggesting by recording these other things, like just life? But if I can tell you my favorite one, just tell you the story.
And these inscriptions came from the doctor's writings.
Yes, it was very important to use the language of the original physician because it's a type of, like liner notes, and a type of poetry. I love when science is accidentally poetic just by being incredibly specific.
Right.
And it is its own type of poetic form. But I'd love to wrap up this project by telling you my favorite image of all and try to share the power of this image. This is the first time in history an uncut umbilical cord was directly recorded. A mother's just given birth, holding the baby, umbilical cord still attached. And this physician had the foresight to put his device, using hair and soot, on it. And until this moment, science didn't know something really beautiful about all of it, something every one of us will experience and share, which is this. Because part of doing this project has been learning how to read this language of the line. But what you're seeing, if you notice these four very prominent beats, and then there's a little break here. And from that moment forward, it's slowly moving to a flat line. This is what we learned that day. This is the mother still oxygenating the baby's blood. Two hearts still in sync. And the reason we need to cry when we are birthed is because that's the first time our lungs inflate with our first independent breath. At that moment, hormones are sent back through the umbilical cord to the mother to tell her, I got this. Now you will harm me if you continue to oxygenate my blood. So what you're looking at are the final few heartbeats in synchronicity, a newly independent heart taking its first breath, and this slow goodbye to each other in the relationship they had. And of course, the new relationship their hearts are going to have as living beings. But it's also so fascinating to me. It's the only example I can find where a flat line doesn't only mean death.
Right.
It means a type of goodbye,
Right.
but also the beginning of a new relationship. And so, I mean, that's just so beautiful to me. And all told in one line with hair and soot. And we revealed something that we all share. And that's why I think art needs to be involved, because a physician wouldn't have told you that story the way I just told you.
Exactly. I think that's the perfect way to end, too.
Okay.
Just, that's a beautiful summation. So thank you for
Yeah.
sharing all of this. You want to show one
No,
more?
I forgot if that was...
I was just looking at the time, and I want to be able to take a few questions.
Sure, absolutely. Okay.
So
thank you.
Yes, we have already. Oh.
She is. And I'm on a mission for us to all know that our representative of human love is alive on the planet right now. She's a genius. She's incredible.
Are you friends?
Yeah, we're friends. We've since become friends. I've worked on her with some projects. I'm so excited to say that a TV show that was so influential to me as a little boy, Cosmos, you may know that Anne holds the rights to that show. And it was rebooted 2 years ago. And the next season will debut next year. And I've contributed 2 stories to the series about the first dream ever recorded. And you hear how I feel about her. So to even know her, let alone work with her, and to contribute back to her passion, a story that I only would have found if I had truly grappled with what she asked of me, which is, where are we in our bodies? which led me to this work about the pulse waves. So it's episode number 5 of next season. So
Do you know it boots next spring?
it's in April. So
All right.
so please watch the episode. It's the
Cool.
first dream ever recorded, and the
Will it be on your website?
Yeah, I'll probably put something out. And the first EEG, the technology she used, the first EEG ever recorded, is on there. So she's alive, and she's. The way I describe her is, with all the problems you can imagine of one person representing us, and I get it, and she got it, they all got it, and yet they did what they had to do in that moment on the golden record. The person who you would hope would be our final representative of human love, the right person got chosen. That's how incredible she is. I really am profoundly humbled and moved by her, and I want the arts to do their job to acknowledge what she did on artistic terms.
Right.
As incredible as she is, of course, she's often introduced as Carl Sagan's widow.
Right.
I love Carl Sagan, but that's not how I would start my
Right.
introduction of her at all. She's incredible. Anyway, she's alive.
Let's see, we have a question here.
So you were on this path to being an artist without knowing you were on the path to being an artist. Check. Okay. You were on a path towards being an artist without knowing so, and you mentioned the epiphany you had. Can you describe that a bit more, like maybe what was going on in your life that maybe led to that epiphany, or that now looking back you realized these were the things that coalesced to make that epiphany happen?
Yeah, it's a bit of a long story and very personal, although I tell you in very brief. But it was the moment I was contending with not having a father, and I insisted that I live with them for a while, which was a terrible decision. And I was clearly in a deep state of depression, and it just went wrong on many levels. But the one thing that we could understand about each other was music, and he was a huge Beatles fan. He was first generation Nicaraguan, and he would tell me stories about he and his brothers learning English by listening to Beatles albums over and over. Anyway, one day he left for work and left Sgt. Pepper's playing on repeat, accidentally on repeat, on the CD player, and the speakers were up against my room on the other side of my wall. And I had locked myself in my room. I was really in a bad place. And he worked late that night, so I don't know, 14 hours I heard Sgt. Pepper's muffled through the plaster wall. And I know it sounds like I'm making this up, but I literally came out of the room. I sat in front of the speakers. I was like, what is this? And when he came home that night, I told him, take me to the mall. I have to go to an art store. I can't tell you how strange it was. I had no reason to say that. And I don't know, something just snapped. And I haven't looked back since that day. So I'm now interested in the neurology of that experience. I've gotten far in trying to understand brain chemistry in such moments. But that was the moment when it happened. Yeah.
Here, we have a question right here.
Hello.
Hi, Heather.
Something that's in your work that's kind of strikes at the core of my existential romanticism is the way that you take objects and make them have new chapters in their lives. So it's as if you can see that these things are alive and have future lives in them. So like the button piece where you took, vinyl records of greats that nobody really uses anymore. I mean, you do, but, and melt them into buttons, put them on the shirt and send it back into the world. So I wonder if you could talk to me about what that is for you.
So there's a bit of the hospice again, but also what I was so drawn to with DJ culture, and took sampling as a type of worldview, not just a technical skill, but sampling at its heart is saying everything has a hidden universe in it if you just know how to unlock it. And for a musician, that means manipulation as sound, and juxtaposition and alteration. But that core spirit that sampling said, even the trash on the side of the road, it was more a problem of my lack of imagination than that it was actually trash. And sampling, I felt, embodied that spirit. And I think tied in with this very influential years around hospice, which also this part about letting go, but also holding on, and that even in the final moments of life, dignity and compassion should be as present as at any other moment of life, which is what I really learned around those hospice nurses, I think. So that merged with the sampling in that everything's got another life if you just know how to care for it, has lingered with me. So I think that's, when I look back, I couldn't say that early on, but now I can sort of analyze and say that. And that's stayed true in all of my work since. Yeah.
Well, unfortunately, I think we're out of time
Okay.
here, but I just want to mention a couple things. Well, first, I want to thank Jackie Edwards, my co-curator, for her work on the show, and also to say that tomorrow morning at 11 o'clock, Dario is going to do a walkthrough of his exhibition, so if anybody wants to join in on that, it's open to the public. So tomorrow morning at 11 o'clock in the galleries with Dario.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.